Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima and I'm here checking out Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX. I've actually wanted to play this series for quite a while at this point because I've heard good things about it. First thing worth noting is that it's not actually made directly by Nintendo, it's made by the same people who make Shyren the Wanderer, which is always appealing to me because I love Shyren the Wanderer. If only I had the time to get back to it, but this series was made by the same team, and it's been a relatively well-received series. It's kind of got the whole Mario and Luigi syndrome going on with it. The first couple of entries were alright, but then it just kind of went downhill. At least that's what I've known about this series before I jumped into this one. But this is a remake of the first game that came out on the Game Boy Advance, so I thought to myself, alright, but probably about time I go around to playing this. And, well, I have. And guess what? I don't enjoy it. Oh man, I don't know what it is about all these roguelikes that seem to completely miss what makes Shyren the Wanderer as a formula work. Because it isn't like The Binding of Isaac compared to Enter the Gungeon compared to however many indie roguelikes you've got going on, right? It's a very specific kind of roguelike that's very clearly been inspired by Shyren the Wanderer because, well, it's made by the same people, but there are also more roguelikes along these lines, i.e. Omega Labyrinth, i.e. What was that other one that I played recently? Chocobo's Mystery Dungeon, and a few other Japanese-inspired ones I've seen in the past, like Izuna, Legend of the Unemployed Ninja on the DS, which I have played. That's also great. But there's just a few things about the roguelike formula that this game does not get right. With that said though, we'll get back to that and let's talk about the overall concept. You are a human that's been transformed into a Pokemon, and you decide to form up with another Pokemon to form what's called a rescue team. And a rescue team dives into Mystery Dungeon style dungeons. They literally call them Mystery Dungeons, capitalized in the help text for this game. So it's clear where the inspiration came from, guys. Really, honest. It's not that I haven't said that it's played Shyren 3 times over already in the first couple of minutes of this video. But they decide you go down into these mystery dungeons, and there is a plot to follow about getting you back to being a regular old human and all that. Not a very good plot, if I'm being perfectly honest, mainly due to the writing. The writing quality is about the most bare bones and just generally generic taste. I say tasteless, but it's more like just the most generic writing I've read in a long time. It is surprisingly, like, if you shifted out all of the Pokemon references, like directly, as in like the names of the Pokemon and all that, and just gave more like random names, it would read like some of the most generic fantasy stuff you've ever bloody seen. So it's not doing a particularly great job on that front. But basically the story is an excuse to dive into dungeons and to either get to the end of the story requested dungeon, which will allow you to continue along the main story, or to dive into dungeons that you've previously been into in order to do rescue requests, which will get you things like supplies, upgrade your rescue rank and stuff like that. I've been playing this for about 6 hours so far, if you couldn't tell by the file save timer that was in the first few seconds of this video. And I haven't got to see how far this extends out, and frankly I don't care to, because I find the entire process way too repetitive and uninteresting. So you're a Pokemon, and with that comes a few expectations. You have your own stats akin to the original Pokemon stats: speed, attack, defense, and regular old special attack and special defense, HP as well. All of the basic stuff. And you also have 4 different moves. And of course, you can learn new moves as you level up. You can also carry along a party with you, up to 3. And you can also recruit new Pokemon as you go down into the dungeons. And you can end up with a bloody conga line of Pokemon following behind you. And it's surprisingly satisfying when you manage to get that conga line to like a boss or something, and then you just completely surround it and beat its shit in. That is always satisfying. But it doesn't happen very much, because one thing this game really likes to do is arbitrarily restrict you from using certain mechanics. And the point where I basically gave up on the game, said fuck this, and started recording footage was right before I started recording the footage that you're seeing on screen right now, because at one point in the story, you are declared basically a heretic and you are exiled from the Pokemon community. Must have found some racist tweets or something, I don't know. And you are basically forced to go through 4 dungeons in a row without having any sort of partner backup, without being able to drop off your items, or well, you can drop off your items in some places, but not all places. And you're not able to bring along any party members either, so any of like the 24 party members you pick up along the way, you can't bring them with you. So it's just you, your partner Pokemon, 4 dungeons in a row. You do get Absol as your partner for the 4th dungeon, but for the first 3, which by the way includes 2 boss fights with legendaries, you are basically on your own. And the game likes to do this a lot. It likes to arbitrarily say, hey, you aren't allowed to use XYZ mechanic, or we're not going to introduce XYZ mechanic for a really long time. They were still introducing mechanics as of like hour number 6, which seems a bit excessive considering how lightweight and how light on the ground the roguelike mechanics are for this game, but we'll get to them. So you just find yourself in the annoying position where the only way the game can really show you any challenge is to arbitrarily restrict you from stuff, so they do that a lot. And having to do 4 dungeons in a row without being able to do things like take along any extra partners or anything like that is not great. And it honestly made me feel really frustrated with the base gameplay, because the base gameplay doesn't really have that much to it. And you think, oh come on, it's Shyren the Wanderer. Surely they've got, well, it's from the same team as Shyren the Wanderer. Surely they've got a bit of like variety to the gameplay. And to be fair, there is some there, but pretty much everything that they've got in this game that makes it unique and gives it a little bit of Pokemon flair ends up also being held back in one way or another, which ends up being really frustrating. So I mentioned you've got 4 moves, right? Every Pokemon has 4 moves. And the way you use them is that you can press the A button while you're facing an enemy, or even while you're not facing an enemy. You'll turn to face the enemy most of the time. It depends on the situation. You will automatically use the move that's most appropriate for the situation. So if you're a fire type, you've got a fire move and you're attacking a grass type, you'll immediately pull out the flamethrower for, you know, for just things like that. Simple stuff. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary. And that's basically the button you'll be using for 98% of the game because, well, the game's just really good at picking out your move for you. And there's also another system that comes along where you can individually move level moves, which is really bizarre. And you also share the experience with those moves across your entire party, and the game actively recommends you to have a move on as many Pokemon as possible so that you've got the most power out of it. Now, when you think of Pokemon, now I haven't played Pokemon since like Pokemon Black, so if this has changed in like the past 10 years, forgive me. But when you think of Pokemon, do you think of every Pokemon having the same move because they'll turn out better in the long run? No, you think of multiple Pokemon, each of them having completely different movesets to give you a bit of diversity and to give you lots of strategies and potential for continuing on into whatever the story or the battles that they've got going on for you are there. You would think that would be the entire case of it, wouldn't you? But no. They make it so that using the same move across everybody is not only like a boost up, but recommended by the game itself. And it just gets weirder like that. Like, there'll be things like dungeons that you'll go into, they'll have like environmental weaknesses that you can't have possibly been prepared for at this point, unless you just got lucky enough to pick the good enough partner Pokemon or main Pokemon at the start of the game. There are apparently things like Mega Evolutions and Evolutions, but they've just been completely disabled at this point. Although with the levels I'm at, evolving probably wouldn't be a very good thing, but, well, that's just a thing. And as I said before, there are things like the 4 dungeons in a row, 2 of which you have to fight bosses on, and 3 of which are stuck with 2 Pokemon instead of 3, and you can't recruit any along the way. So you find yourself in a position where they just seem to be insistent on making it as repetitive and unenjoyable as possible, despite the fact they've got plenty of mechanics to go with it. And this isn't helped out by the fact that it's incredibly repetitive for a few reasons, and the main reason is that you've got access to automatic mode, and this automatic mode will lead you around the dungeon by the nose, picking up items and sending you towards the exit. It'll stop automatically when you run into, like, another Pokemon, for example, that you need to fight off. But then again, as I said before, all you need to do is press A. It'll pick out the best move for you and use it immediately. So, you end up hitting the auto button to wander around the maze, to pick up items and then go to the exit. Then when you get to the Pokemon, you end up pressing the A button for a while until they're dead, and then you press the auto button again. Then you get to another Pokemon. You press the A button for a while. You rinse and repeat. The game is smart enough to know what to do in like 95% of situations. And for the other 5% of situations, you have the ability to toggle the automatic mode to immediately go for the exit, no questions asked, or to go looking around for items before it goes for the exit. And even then you can just turn off the automatic mode and just walk around anyway. So it ends up being really repetitive as a result, since there's next to no other mechanics that have popped up in the dungeon yet that would make it interesting. You've got traps, but of course they're Shira and the Wanderer style traps. They're invisible until you walk over them or get lucky enough to attack over them. So yeah, you find yourself just praying not to run into them. There are shops that you can find, but you actually avoid those automatically when you're on auto. And there are some reasons that you actually want to avoid spending money while you're in the dungeons, because it's usually overpriced, and you need money to build more camps for more Pokemon that you're becoming friends with along the way, because they need specific camps in order to stick with you. So again, you just end up wandering around, pressing the auto button, pressing the attack button a few times, pressing the auto button, pressing the attack button a few times. Because there's just nothing else in the dungeon itself to really make it so that you need to break from this formula. The most notable being the difficulty. This game's way too fucking easy. At least by default. When you've got 3 party Pokemon, you're wandering around like dungeons trying to do rescue requests and all that, earning tons of valuable items really easily, and just not having a hard time of anything. It gets really boring really fast. And it just continues on in the same way for hours at a time. The only time it really breaks the mold is when you're going up against boss Pokemon and you're dramatically underleveled. Because, again, there's a point where they basically force you to go into a 3-dungeon marathon with bosses that you have to fight off. And those are the only real times the game even gets hard, and even then, just some creative usage of my abilities was more than enough to get me out of those situations. Put them to sleep with a wand, then use Thunder Wave so that they're paralyzed and they can't attack. Get a few attacks in, wait until your health is low and heal up with the dozens of healing berries you found along the way. Rinse and repeat. The only reason why I started having trouble saying this video footage is because everything is actually slightly higher level than me, and I don't have the ability to go back and get any items because, well, they're just straight shots. You have to do them like this. And yeah, again, I'm restricted from accessing like my helpers, so I can't bring along anyone who'll be good against ice types, a la some of the fire types that I wanted to be getting from the previous dungeon. But yeah, it's too easy. It doesn't have anywhere near like the not sadistic, but getting close, but still giving you plenty of ways to get around the difficulty that Shira and the Wanderer has. And it isn't helped out by the fact that there's not much in the way of external mechanics going on with this Shira and the Wanderer knockoff, because the only things you can do outside of like the actual dungeons in this give your Pokemon individual hold items, which you can lose if you faint, by the way. Good luck with that. You can store your money, store your items, build more camps to get more Pokemon in. Get missions, they'll send you down into the dungeons, so they don't really count in terms of having anything extra to do on the surface. And that's really about it. You do also have like this one thing you can do, the dojo, where you can send Pokemon into it repeatedly for like 55 seconds. And the basic idea is just to kill as many Pokemon as possible by just hitting the auto button, pressing the A button when it decides to stop, and then repeating for 55 seconds and hoping you don't die too much. And it's basically just experience grinding. It feels like something you should be able to skip, but they make you do it over and over and over and over again. And considering that the gameplay turns out to be basically no different from your basic like dungeon diving gameplay anyway, it just makes it feel even more repetitive. There's nothing along the lines of Shyren the Wanderer like improving certain moves with like certain materials, like you'd improve like weapons and shields in Shyren the Wanderer. There's no combining items, there's no mini games along the outside like that weird Sudoku one. There's no like massive tutorial that you can go and brush up on. There's no branching paths, and nothing gets particularly harder. Sometimes you run across like really strong monsters in dungeons that you've already beaten, but considering that you'll have like a conga line of monsters behind you by the time you run into the really strong stuff, you'll be fine, more or less. So, once again, it just comes back down to the fact that the game doesn't have very many actual mechanics to it, and it's incredibly linear, and the auto stuff is so good at playing the game, you might as well leave it to it, because you're basically going to be doing the same thing that it's going to be doing anyway. Because my strategy, like considering that you can see all of the monsters and all of the items on the map, you basically have the ability to do what the automatic mode does, but less efficiently. Isn't helped out by the fact that the game doesn't perform very well. Especially when you've got things like weather effects going on, but also when a lot of monsters are in the dungeon floor. It can be a bit rough on the frame rate, and that cuts the input in, like, it makes it so that it's actually really sluggish to, excuse the chair. It makes it so that it's really sluggish to accept any inputs. And it's really unpleasant, especially when you're trying to play, as I said before, the dojo stuff, where you'll be going, where you're trying to go and get as many like Pokemon fainted as possible to get your XP as high as possible. And the game lags on you, and then the clock counts down at the same rate, so you get less out of each individual ticket because the Switch is struggling to handle this game. Which I don't understand. It's such a simple game. We've seen games that look way better than this, run better than this on the Switch itself, so I don't get what the problem is here. It's a bloody remake of a Game Boy Advance game, for God's sake. You're telling me you're having trouble getting it running at a decent clip? I'd be lying if I said I appreciated the visual look of it as well. I think they're going for this weird, like, cel-shaded style to try and get a little bit of a, sort of 2D sprite style going on. But at the end of the day, I think it just looks kind of ugly. It's not that impressive. I'm not really that enthused by it. And considering that it's making the Switch huff and puff and cry when there's too much of it on one particular floor at once, it's not great. I haven't been paying any attention to the music, so I can't really tell you anything about that. So yeah, that's basically everything I've got to say about it. Like, it's kind of neat to be able to play a Mystery Dungeon game crossed with Pokemon, but there's so little to actually do in the sense of the roguelike side of things. There's so little in the way of mechanical depth to the point where the game can literally play itself 90% of the time and you'll be fine. The overall difficulty is too low. The fact that they have this annoying tendency to take away a bunch of mechanics to make the game even more boring is even worse. And the fact that that's the only way they can really make the game even remotely difficult is even worse. So, I wanted to give this game up at the 2-hour mark, the 3-hour mark, the 4-hour mark, and the 5-hour mark, because I was just getting nothing out of it. That's the truth. I don't like it. A lot of people are saying this is a great game for kids, but I'd like to think kids would be better than just hitting the auto buttons all the time. There are a bunch of other things that are worth noting. This does have an online system where you can ask people to rescue your crew online if you go down, but that means you can't actually play again until someone comes along and decides to rescue you. So if nobody feels like rescuing you, you'll just be waiting for days to play again, which is something that I tried to do, but when I realized that it's probably not going to happen, I gave up on it like an hour later. What else is there to note? You don't actually lose your levels or anything. You only lose all the items you're carrying, but this also includes your equipment, which is not great. There is a online sensor, but it doesn't work offline. I named my team Lazy Bugger, for example. I was gonna call them the Lazy Buggers, but for whatever reason it is 11 letter limit, not 12 or anything like that. I don't know why it's 11 specifically, but there you go. And whenever I went to look at the online stuff, it always said it was a lazy star, strangely enough. I'm just trying to think if I missed anything. I really don't think I have. Because there's just so little to it. I was a bit worried that I wasn't going to have enough footage, so I ended up recording like 55 minutes of it. And annoyingly enough, I managed to get to the point where I was actually able to show off a bunch of the usual mechanics that you have to deal with around the 38-minute mark-ish. And yeah, there's really nothing to it. It's just a bunch of stuff here, items and stuff like that. It's building extra camps for the Pokemon, which is basically just getting as much gold as possible. There's just goals, and the goals are really simple too, because all they are is just head down into the dungeon, press A on something, you're done, and you get the option to immediately leave the dungeon. So you pick up like 5 or 6 for the one dungeon, you go in, you do all of them, and you immediately hop back out. And considering that the dungeons don't level up with you, they end up being steamrolls. So you just walk in, flatten everything, get all the jobs done, and go right back out. And it's even less satisfying than when the game is at least has a resemblance of a challenge. Yeah, I basically got nothing else to say about it. I don't like it. It's not complex enough, it's not difficult enough. It's basically capable of being played by itself 90% of the time, which I despise for a game that is made by not only made by the same team as Shyren the Wanderer, but is basically a low-ranked Shyren the Wanderer clone. I want Shyren the Wanderer 6, goddammit. If that isn't completely obvious, or at the very least, give me Shyren 5+ on everything except the Vita, because I'm getting a little bit worried they're leaving Shyren proper to die on like platforms that haven't had a game, that haven't got games releasing for them now. At least put it on PC. So at least, that is really my chair, I do apologize. At least put Shyren 5 on PC so that we can make sure that it's around for longer than like 10 more years. Yeah, that's it. You can watch the rest of this footage if you like. I don't recommend Pokemon Mystery Dungeon in the slightest, because it practically plays itself and it's ridiculously boring as a result. Until they feel the need to take away a bunch of crap from you arbitrarily for story reasons, at which point it becomes more difficult, but still not enjoyable. This has been Blue Maxima, and I will see you all next time.